If you're listening to this podcast, it means you're ready, no, more than ready, to have a major breakthrough in your business. You're hungry for change and you're hungry for growth, and that's why you're feeding your mind right now with all of this valuable information. But to drive those changes, to be really smart about what you're doing and to make the right choices before you take massive action, you need help from someone who's been there, someone who's going to coach you through it, even just someone to get you started on your journey. That's why Tony Robbins is offering a free one-to-one business strategy session from one of his top business coaches, a $600 value, completely free, no strings attached. That's right. If you're listening right now, you can go to tonyrobbins.com/CEO and sign up for a free session with a member of Tony's team who's helped business owners like yourself overcome their obstacles and set them on the path to success. Welcome to the Tony Robbins Podcast. I'm your host, Annie Org. Have you ever wondered how the most successful companies make their hires? Or what makes for a winning team? Have you ever wanted to know what characteristics distinguish the most innovative entrepreneurs? Or what makes someone truly original? We do. That's why we sat down with the renowned organizational psychologist, Adam Grant. Adam is the guy that companies like Google call when they're trying to solve the big problems. He's been recognized as Wharton's top-rated teacher for 5 straight years. He's been named one of the world's 35 most influential management thinkers, and he's been on Fortune's 40 Under 40 list. His TED Talk on original thinkers has more than 5.5 million views, and he's authored 2 New York Times best-selling books. Actually, he's just co-authored a new book with Sheryl Sandberg called Option B. It's about facing adversity, building resilience, and finding joy. I sat down with Adam to discuss just how businesses can get the most out of their employees, and how employees can get the most out of their jobs. We dug into the personality dynamics of givers and takers, innovators, and original thinkers. And we talked about why it's so important to not just meet customer expectations, but to exceed them. So Adam Grant, welcome to the Tony Robbins Podcast.
Thank you.
All right. So the first question I wanted to ask you, this is a little bit of an odd one, but I was looking, as I mentioned earlier in the bio, you have this award that says goes above and beyond the call of duty for MBA teaching from Wharton. What does that mean exactly?
I have no idea. It just appeared one day.
All of a sudden, there was no specific example that they gave you?
It's a mystery. I did ask at some point, and I was told that I spend an unusual amount of time doing office hours to try to give students advice and answering emails and fielding calls with them. But your guess is as good as mine.
So when you're doing office hours, since it is, business, do you get pitched a lot of ideas, or do they kind of use you as a sounding board to help figure out if there's something that they should pursue?
They used to. And then I wrote about this bonehead decision I made to pass on investing in Warby Parker. And no one wants to pitch me anymore. No, actually, I guess the stream of pitches has gone up consistently, especially after writing a whole book about original thinkers, which includes a bunch of examples and data points on entrepreneurs. And I always tell them in response, look, my expertise is people, not necessarily how to run a business. And so you should take everything I say with as many grains of salt as you can put together.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you mentioned Warby Parker, because I know that's a story that you mention in the originals, and a few times you use that as an example when you speak. But I ran into Neil Blumenthal recently because we were at a Tony Robbins event, his business mastery event, and as sort of a new format for that event, we had a panel of speakers. And so it was Neil from Warby Parker, it was Melanie Willen from SoulCycle, and then Joe Gebbia from Airbnb. And I asked them individually what was different about this. And instead of sort of responding with that, it was really high energy, all 3 of them independently said, backstage before the panel, we're so used to people just saying, hey, get out, tell your story, everybody's going to love it, the sort of standard stuff. They're like, Tony took us aside and he said, okay, what can I do for you? What can I give to you now, whether it's advice or, some water, whatever it is, that will help you be great? And I thought of that story because one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today is your idea of givers and takers. So people are often surprised when people are openly giving, just as Neil, Melanie, and Joe were really surprised that Tony had been very giving before this big event. I'd love to just hear a little bit about how you see giving and taking within organizations and how to identify those types of givers and takers.
Yeah, it's totally fascinating to me. I always assumed, Anna, that like the nicer somebody was, the more generous they were. And, if somebody seemed to be critical, skeptical, challenging, must be more selfish. And I started gathering a bunch of data and found that there was like no correspondence between those attributes. So giving and taking is all about your inner motives. What are your intentions toward others, right? Is your stance, what can I do for you, or what can you do for me? And there's a totally separate trait called agreeableness, which is your outer veneer. How pleasant is it to interact with you? And so, it's easy to recognize the agreeable givers who are both nice and generous, and the disagreeable takers who are just jerks across the board.
Easy to identify. Yep.
Exactly. But the other two combinations throw us off a lot. There are a lot of disagreeable givers out there who, on the surface are gruff and tough, but underneath they have others' best interests at heart. And too often we write them off and say, yeah, that person's kind of prickly, must be a selfish taker. When in reality, those are the people who give us the critical feedback that we don't want to hear, but need to hear. And they're the very best champions of change because they're the people who aren't afraid of challenging the status quo. And then on the flip side, the agreeable takers are the ones that you really have to watch out for. Those are the fakers who are really nice to your face, and then they stab you right in the back. And I think most of the screening that we end up doing is to say, look, just because someone is friendly does not mean that person actually cares about you. And it might be fun to chat about what are the signs that person actually is an agreeable taker.
Yeah, how can you tell?
Well, one of the easiest patterns to look for is kissing up and kicking down. Takers are great fakers when dealing with powerful people because they know that's how you get ahead. You impress someone in a position of influence with your generosity. But then they learn it's a lot of work to pretend to care about everybody. And they end up letting their guard down with peers and subordinates who see more of their true colors. So it's a red flag if somebody has a great reputation upward, but it's more mixed lateral and downward. That also means bosses are the worst references on character because anybody can go to any taker can line up a few bosses to say nice things about them. It's really the people that have been below them or next to them who get to see those true colors.
So it's almost like you need a peer review as opposed to an official review from a managerial team.
Exactly. And sometimes you don't have access to that. And the only thing you can do is try to pick up, is there a history or a reputation of selfish behavior? But sometimes you can actually learn things from the conversations you have with them. So one of the things we all do when we interview people is we ask, tell me about your greatest successes and failures. And we ought to go the extra step and say, tell me what caused your success and what caused your failure. And that's when you start to see that the takers are the ones who use more I's and me's when talking about accomplishments. And they're much more likely to blame their failures and mistakes on other people and throw them under the bus, which is kind of a useful thing to pick up. Yeah. And then one other favorite way to spot an agreeable taker, especially, actually, Anna, we'll try this out. So let's take a taking behavior. Yeah, watch out.
I'm nervous.
We're about to assess you. But
okay.
Let's take a taking behavior like theft. So stealing from your company. It could be cash, materials, merchandise, intellectual property. Mm-hmm. The question is, what % of people do you think steal at least $10 in a typical month from their employer?
At least $10 in a typical month. I would think it's pretty high because they might be doing it, but have sort of convinced themselves that it's not stealing. So maybe 70%.
Ooh, you're close on this one.
Ooh.
So I don't actually know what the real answer is, and I don't care.
Okay.
But I care a lot about what you think the answer is. Because the data show that the higher your estimate that other people are thieves, the greater the chances that you're a thief.
Oh, snap.
Luckily, you didn't go over 80% because then we'd all have to check our wallets.
And hey, you know what? And I moralized too, because I was thinking, other people might justify it. but
No,
I
see,
don't.
look, you're off the hook. You're totally off the hook. But what's interesting is when people answer that question, most of the time they ask themselves, what would I do or what have I
Mm,
done? And then they project that onto others.
mm-hmm.
So you get an extreme taker to answer this question, and it's like, what percent of people steal $10 from their company? Because takers always talk that way.
Yeah,
And
obviously.
they're like, last week I stole $372. I'm assuming 10 a month is common, 98%.
Wow. Or they'll be they would, almost take it to the opposite extreme and just say, well, everybody does it, right? But there must
Which
be
is exactly
a few, goody two shoes that don't, so I'll just lower it by a few percentage points.
that's exactly right. And that's why I
Uh,
liked your logic so much. What you see with a lot of givers is they'll just say, like, how do you even steal $10 from a company? Like, how many pens do you have to take home
yeah.
to add? It's it's like 45. But
Wow.
interestingly, takers do anticipate more selfish behavior from others,
Mm-hmm.
and that's part of how they justify and rationalize being a taker. It's not
Mm.
me. All of you people are selfish, so I'm just being smart and cautious by protecting myself. And so the way that I like to apply this is to say, look, no one question's ever going to do the trick completely, but pick the taking behavior you're most worried about. It could be stealing credit for others' ideas. It could be dumping grunt work on others. And it might even be just hoarding or hiding knowledge instead of sharing it freely. And you ask people to predict how common that is. And then if they give a high estimate, you ask them why. And an explanation like yours is absolutely legitimate. The deadly one is when people say, I believe that others are fundamentally selfish, which is code
Mm.
for I am fundamentally selfish.
Wow. This is so tricky. I'm definitely going to use that. So if taker, it sounds, it's a little bit discouraging because now it sounds like takers are everywhere. And you had an interesting quote. You said takers rise quickly, but fall quickly at the hands of matchers. So I understand the first part, right? So they could potentially, because on the surface, especially if they're agreeable takers, they could rise quickly within the ranks of an organization and be in positions of power, which is frightening, right? But what are some of the ways that they either hit a limit or, like you said, they fall quickly at the hands of matchers? What does that mean?
Yeah. So what's interesting is relatively few of us are pure givers or takers. We do have a default, right? So if you're a giver, you're much more focused in the majority of your interactions on, how can I help? What can I contribute? And if you're a taker, you're much more likely to focus on, how can I get ahead? But what most of us do is in the vast majority of our interactions at work, we choose this third style called matching, where we say, basically, look, I'll do something for you if you do something for me. And that way we're playing it safe, right? We're not being too selfish. We're not being too generous. And what's great is in the data I have, well over half of people worldwide self-identify as matchers, as like that being their default style when they meet somebody new. And matchers believe in an eye for an eye, right? The just world, what goes around comes around. And when it doesn't, they're the people who love to punish takers because it's not fair if you're a taker and you act selfishly and you get away with it. So matchers like to become the karma police. And if you're a true matcher, when you meet a taker, you just think to yourself, like, it's my mission in life to punish the hell out of this person, right?
Yeah,
And
that
deliver
guy's
the
going
sword of
down.
justice.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so then the question is, well, if most people are matchers and they're motivated to punish takers, how do they do that? And you see that there's a small percentage of people who will deliberately feed takers false information to try to sabotage them.
Mm.
But most matchers choose a more subtle, deadly weapon, which is called gossip.
Ooh.
And it usually goes something like this. Hey, Anna, don't trust this guy. He's a selfish bastard. And that makes it really hard for takers to sustain their success because they can't just screw over a bunch of people and then expect to start over fresh in all their new relationships. Some of those people are going to be matchers who are making sure that their reputation follows them. And that's how a lot of takers fall is, they do enough kicking down that it ends up coming back to bite them.
Yeah. So, you just wrote an article that was super interesting in your LinkedIn influencer column, and it was called How to Change a Selfish Person's Stripes. And the idea was that, in many cases, we don't have control over who is in our organization. So you might have these matchers who are, sort of they're being the karma police, right? But in a lot of cases, if that's not working, or if you can't fire the takers or even avoid collaborating with them, how do you make the best of that situation? So are there tricks that you can use to either mitigate or even shift the behavior of a taker to one of a giver?
Oh, one of my favorite questions. I don't think it's easy to change a taker's stripes, but it is worth recognizing that very few people are takers in every relationship, and those people are called psychopaths.
Yep.
So for the rest of takers, right, there's some data from Japan suggesting that, less than 10% of people will just relentlessly pursue their own interests without concern for others. And so, the majority of takers are operating that way either because, they're narcissists, they believe in a zero-sum world where if I want to win, everyone else has to lose, or they've just been burned one too many times. And, they kind of walked away thinking, like, I have to put myself first or else no one else will. And so if you understand that, one of the things you can do is realize, look, like most takers are generous in some of their interactions, or they're at least, there are times when they're less selfish, and you want to observe the fluctuations in their behavior and then figure out, all right, those moments where they helped others, like, what did those moments have in common? And what does that suggest about, is there a certain kind of expertise they love to share? Is there a group of people they're passionate about helping? And then you start tailoring those requests to the kinds of giving that they gravitate toward. Mm-hmm. And then they start to get known for helping in that way, and then they're trapped. They have to do it, which is great. And then the other way that I think can be really effective, although I would say try this one at your own risk, is a financial services company a few years back. There's a woman named Kathy who got a big promotion, and she was told that she was going to co-lead a new team with this guy that today I'm going to call Colin because that's his name. And she had 4 different people warn her, do not trust Colin. He's going to steal a bunch of your ideas, and he's going to dump the most unpopular work on you. Watch your back with this guy. Mm-hmm. And Kathy sat down in their very first meeting together and did something that very few people have the courage to do. She said, hey, Colin, I understand we're going to be leading this team together, and I just wanted to let you know, this is what I've heard about you.
Whoa.
And she shares all the reputational feedback.
Wow.
And Colin's
she's just upfront about it.
Totally. She calls a spade. And yeah, Colin sort of sheepish. And he says, I don't know who you've been talking to, but those people are clearly all jealous of me.
Oof.
Like, okay, now
look
we
in the
know
mirror,
you're a
buddy.
taker.
Yeah.
Yep. But what's so interesting is for the next year and a half, Colin changes his stripes. And he shares credit. He mentors people below him. He volunteers for really undesirable projects. And I think the beauty of what Kathy did is that she made his reputation visible to him, and then she gave him a chance to earn a new one. And what she said, in closing that conversation, I think really stuck, which was she said, I don't know whether this is true or not, but I hope it's not true because I don't work well with people who operate this way. And if this is who you are not going to like working with me. Message delivered. So sometimes takers don't realize that they're operating that way or that they're known that way, and making it more visible to them can help them reform.
Yep. I think you also mentioned too, as part of that is that if you make clear to the person that their behavior is undermining their own goals, right, and they're not going to, they're basically acting against their self-interest. So if you can identify, right, what their outcomes are, and then if you show them how their behavior is not helping them achieve those outcomes, that's another way to sort of shift their behavior.
Yeah, I think one of the virtues of dealing with takers is that if they're really that selfish, at least they're predictable. Right? If you know what their interests and goals are, then you can anticipate what they're going to care about. And in a world that's more connected than ever before, where relationships and reputations tend to drive the economy, whether you have a service job or you work in a team or you're an entrepreneur that has to fundraise and sell, in all of those conditions, right? In the long run, being a taker really works against you. And there are very few people who want to trust you or work with you. And so sometimes just helping takers connect those dots and realize being a taker might seem like the shortest path to success, but it's also one of the riskiest over time. Maybe I should rethink that.
Yeah. So if that's, from a peer perspective, that makes a lot of sense, right? So if you're an organization, these are some of the things you can do. What if you are a business owner? And I say business owner and want to emphasize owner, because one of the concepts that Tony teaches at Business Mastery is that a lot of people think that they're a business owner, but they're actually a business operator. So they're in the day-to-day and they're really involved in the day-to-day operations of the business, which from, this perspective, then you can identify the takers and you can really be in on the ground and help shape your company culture. But if you're a business owner, you're a little bit removed from the day-to-day. So if you're a business owner, and you really have responsibility to create a culture where everybody can excel, and where specifically, to your point, where givers can excel, because they're not the ones who are rising quickly up through the ranks, right? What are some of the things that you can do to cultivate that kind of environment?
One of the biggest mistakes that I see business owners making is they say, look, we want generosity. We want people to help each other solve problems. And that's the right spirit of collaboration.
Oh, yeah. And they put it all, in the values and the mission. It's all written down, right?
It is. Yeah. And then they only measure and promote and reward on individual achievements.
Yeah.
Which is, great way to create a world where takers succeed. And I think that, obviously changing that is really critical. And so then the question is how? Best example I've seen is at Corning, where they made the Gorilla Glass originally for the iPhone and the iPad. And they have scientists and engineers there where they have this Corning Fellows program. If you get named a fellow, you have a job for life and a lab for life, which is pretty cool.
Wow. Is it like being a tenured professor?
Even better, I think, because, you have a real job. But what's interesting is when they go to select their fellows, one of the factors is, can you drive, breakthrough innovative performance? And so, like a lot of the fellows will be the lead author on a patent that's worth 100 million US or more. And most companies would stop there, right? If you can drive that kind of innovation, we want to lock you up for life and throw away the key.
Sure.
Corning says, no, we're worried that competent takers will pollute the culture and that if we give them permanent job security, their contributions will dwindle over time. And so they have this other set of criteria, which includes, are you a supporting author on other people's patents? And I think this is ingenious because it can take a decade to finish a patent. And there are not a lot of takers who are like, you know what, Anna, I'm going to pretend to help you for the next 7 years, in the hopes that you will reward my false generosity by making me the 43rd author on your patent, right? Not going to happen.
Not going to happen.
It's the people who day in and day out, share their knowledge and, try to support each other and solve problems that end up getting those later authorships. And Corning says you got to do both. You have to show that you can drive your own results, but also that you can elevate the results of other people. And I think these kinds of dual performance evaluation, reward, promotion metrics, I think they're so key. And I guess the question for anyone running a business is, what's your equivalent of later patent authorship? What are those signs that somebody is day in, day out contributing to the success of others? And how do you make sure that gets rewarded?
Sure. It's like KPIs for the internal culture of your company.
It is, or it's like, a basketball team, making sure that you measure assists and block shots, not just points scored. And then go even further and say, all right, there are a lot of intangibles too. So, let's look at how well our team does when each player is on the court versus off the court, and know who's really improving our ability to win and excel.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's something that's really challenging identifying those secondary metrics, but it sounds like it's absolutely essential for the company's long-term success.
I think it is, and it's not about incentivizing giving, right? We don't want to motivate takers to be better fakers. I think it's more about just taking away the disincentives to giving and saying, look, there are plenty of people who would love to be helpful. They just want to know that they're not going to be punished for it, and that
Yeah.
it is valued behavior around here.
Yep. So those are some great principles, right? This whole giving taking idea to building a winning team. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about what it takes to build a winning company, right? So on the external, those external markers. So one of the things that Tony tells entrepreneurs a lot is he just says, you know what, the core thing you need to do is you have to add more value than anyone else. So you have to meet and exceed the expectations of your customers, because when you do that, you get raving fans. So satisfied customers, it sounds like what everybody wants. That's not what you want. Those people go away. Raving fans are the ones that stay. So I'm curious. So, you're an organizational psychology genius and someone who's just intensely studied human behavior and what motivates people. So flipping the switch a little bit and looking to people who are looking for, product market fit, but also understanding how to position their product or their service to, consumers. Can you give us an idea of what you think is motivating people now more than ever, right? Why do people buy what they buy? Like, what is it? Convenience? Is it quality, price? Is there some sort of cultural shift going on where consumers are starting to value some things more than others that our audience might not be aware of?
I have to say I'm really torn on this one. And you should. Should definitely not believe anything I'm about to say, because
Of course not.
as an organizational psychologist, I spend all my time thinking about people at work, and it's really consumer psychologists who are experts on the marketing and customer side of the equation. But
Sure.
I think obviously like, people don't sort themselves into buckets, right? Like I have a job and I'm also a consumer, and I'm not a fundamentally different person in those two
Right.
roles, I hope. So here's what I've observed. I think, first of all, I think Tony's right on target. When he says, look, not just meeting customer expectations, but exceeding it is critical. And I think that's one of the mechanisms for that is actually because most consumers, by default, just like most employees, are matchers. Mm-hmm. Right? They believe that generosity deserves to be rewarded in the same way that selfishness should be punished. Mm-hmm. And so when you go above and beyond for a customer who's expecting you to be fair and meet expectations, right, you trigger that basic justice motive to say, all right, like this company went above and beyond. And now, I want to make sure that, not only do they benefit from it directly, because I'll buy more products, but, I also want to spread the word and refer customers because this is a company with good values. Mm-hmm. And, I think that one of the things that speaks to is consumers are constantly asking, how do I know if I can trust a company? How do I know if I can trust your products or your services? And if you look at the research, trust actually breaks down into 3 dimensions. There's the basic dimension of competence, which is, are you able to deliver? And do you have the capabilities and skills to do what you say you're going to do? Mm-hmm. And then the other 2 dimensions are really more about character. So one dimension is benevolence, which is, do you actually care about your customers, or are you just about profits? And that's where, actual brands can be judged as givers and takers, just like people can. And then the third dimension, which I think is becoming more and more critical in recent years, is integrity, which is, you might be perfectly competent and I might see you as benevolent, but do I agree with your principles? And do I think that you're going to follow through on them so that, your actions actually match your words? And people don't necessarily pay a lot of attention if you establish integrity, but when you violate it, watch out. Right? That's when consumers will run screaming in the other direction.
Oh, sure.
Or cry foul. Mm-hmm. And I think we're going to see in the years to come more and more emphasis placed on how to, as a consumer, how do I judge whether you really have integrity and whether your words are going to match your deeds?
Sure. And it's insane too how quickly things blow up. I mean, look what just happened just this past week with Uber and Lyft, right? I mean, just the very idea that a slight action. I mean, it wasn't like a huge thing, but it was interpreted as like a travesty. and one hashtag. I feel like every brand is one hashtag away from some major negative publicity, and there are so many competitors that are just waiting for to leverage the fact that their competitor is being criticized for something. And sometimes it has to do with politics, right? But sometimes it's things that are outside of what's going on in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't help but notice when you said travesty, yeah. No pun intended. But I mean, yeah, I think we've all known as long as we can remember thinking about this, that the trust is much easier to destroy than it is to rebuild. Mm-hmm. And I think that at some level, we're going to see more and more consumers who feel like it's their responsibility to be watchdogs and make sure that the brands really are living up to their promises. And I think that actually circles back to me. Then you ask, like, okay, what is it that really drives how people treat their customers? Mm-hmm. And one of the most robust predictors of whether you're going to do right by your customers is whether you treat your employees right. There's a huge spillover effect of how employees are treated, on how they end up treating their customers. And that's why I'm sort of dumbfounded every time I see a company that says we put customers first. No, you don't put your customers first. You put your employees first. Mm-hmm. And then you can trust that your employees will be more likely to put their customers first.
Yep. This actually just happened. There was a Inc. 5000 conference, and the CEO of Gravity stood up and was talking to Tony just about what had happened recently with his company. Are you familiar with that story, by the way? The Gravity?
Yeah, they had paid like a minimum wage of $70,000 a year per employee, right?
Exactly. Yep. And there were some sort of nuances around it that kind of got put aside, but the gist of it was that his employees then pooled together their money, and this is everybody from management to customer service, and they bought him his dream car, which was a Tesla. And Tony's point in that interaction with the CEO was, look, you treated your employees like they were your customers, right? You put them first. And that is not just something where they're going to then sort of feel this gratitude toward you, but that pours outside of the walls of your company and that gets put out onto your customers. So really, I mean, it's just a proof point of what you were just saying, about how important it is to really build that culture from the inside out. There's also so many ways too that if you're incongruent with how you treat your employees, it's not a walled garden anymore, right? Like people know. There are so many different ways, whether it's through social or, there's Glassdoor, the, offline word of mouth, the whole deal. It's something that you just can't keep secret. So, that's definitely something to watch out for as a small business owner.
Yeah, which is good for everyone involved, but more challenging for business owners.
Yes.
And there's actually, when you think about building that culture, I think one of the other mistakes that I see a lot of small business owners make is they say, look, I have to hire stars. I only want A players. And the reality is there's a sociologist, Jim Barron, who studied this across industries. And he shows that if you hire people who are like the next level down in terms of skill, but highly motivated and and value generosity and concern for others, that if you just overpay them by a little bit relative to what they're expecting to make, then there's a huge loyalty dividend where they feel like, wow, this is a one of a kind employer. And just that small amount of overpaying, it might be by about 10%, actually wipes out the difference in their performance between them and stars.
Wow.
So you don't actually have to hire people who are outsized performers from the get-go. You just want to hire people who are motivated and skilled and treat them well.
Yeah.
Sounds simple, right?
Yep.
Done.
Yeah, right. No, that is a great hiring tip for our audience. And that's something else that Tony talks about a lot is, you hire for capacity and attitude. You don't hire for skills or existing experience. And that's something that I think you can definitely get a lot of great talent if you follow those principles.
Yeah. And, I see one of the big misinterpretations of hiring for attitude is so many small business owners say, I want to hire for culture fit. Right? I've gotten that, like, you don't have to be the best performer today or the smartest person in the room, but you have to be a fit with our culture. Mm-hmm. And this turns out to work out pretty well when you study startups. The ones that hire primarily on culture fit are far less likely to fail, and they're also more likely to go public in Silicon Valley than the ones that are looking for stars or even just the skills you have today. Mm-hmm. But as the firm grows, culture fit ends up predicting the slowest growth rates when you track market cap and other kinds of metrics. And what happens is that, early on, you're able to bring in these people who lived and breathed the same values, and they were uniquely motivated, and they were all working toward the same mission. Mm-hmm. And then over time, culture fit becomes a proxy for groupthink. And you end up, hiring all these people who think exactly like each other.
Which stifles innovation, right?
Exactly. You weed out diversity of thought.
Yeah.
And so, one of the best antidotes to that I've seen is from IDEO, the great design firm that made the mouse for Apple. IDEO, ran into this problem early, and they said, we've got to throw culture fit out the window. Instead, let's hire on cultural contribution, where, when we look at new people, instead of asking, do you match our culture, we're going to ask what's missing from our culture, and then hire the people who are going to enrich it most effectively. And I would love to see more small business owners taking that seriously and saying, look, I've got to analyze what's absent from my culture and then bring those people in, reward them, promote them, as opposed to just trying to clone what's already working in my culture.
Wow, that's great. And it's, definitely, sort of perpetuates the growth of new ideas within the company. And that's something that you talk about in depth in Original. So I just wanted to make a quick shout out to everybody that is listening. So this book, The Originals, it is a #1 national bestseller. It's one of Amazon's best books as of last year. Adam Grant also has written Give and Take, which taps into some of the principles that we talked about today. That was also ranked one of the best books by Amazon, the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal. It was one of Oprah's riveting reads. Harvard Business Review also acknowledged it as one of the best books. So I really, really encourage all of you guys to go out and read more of Adam's work. Adam, just to wrap up, I wanted to ask you, you have a new book in the works, and I know you can't talk about it that much, but I think our audience would love to know what is next and what to look for from you this spring.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you, and I'll try to live up to a small fraction of the nice things you just said, Anna. But so new book is coming out April 24th. It's called Option B. I wrote it with Sheryl Sandberg, the Facebook COO and lean-in author. And it's about facing adversity and finding resilience. As I think a lot of people know, Sheryl lost her husband suddenly almost 2 years ago. And we spent a lot of time talking after that about how she could help her kids recover and find strength. And then, what she could do as well in those situations. And we sort of ended up doing a lot of research together and speaking with some remarkable people who had achieved resilience and built resilient communities and companies and families. And we ended up writing a book about how to do that. So looking forward to it coming out soon.
Wow, that sounds fascinating.
And I have to say, when you mentioned at the beginning that Tony was talking to a bunch of entrepreneurs about what he could give to them before they went up on stage, he, without knowing, he actually gave something to me when I was getting ready to go on stage some months ago.
Really?
I spoke at an event that I guess he had been at the previous year, and I walked up and the host said, I just wondered, I see that you were a springboard diver. Have you ever talked to Tony Robbins about his trampoline?
Oh, the
And
rebounder. The rebounder.
yeah, I said,
Yes.
no, what are you talking about?
Uh-huh.
And he said, well, Tony, before he goes up on stage, he bounces on a trampoline to get his energy up.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, wait, does that mean he only speaks at places that have trampolines? Because as a diver, when we trained, we used to practice on trampolines, and they were like the big gymnastics kind, right, that you see in the Olympics.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And that's what I was picturing. And they're like, no. We bring a little mini trampoline. I'm like, phew.
Yeah. You're like, or,
was-
is it foldable?
was
Does
su-
it fit in his suitcase? What's the deal? Yeah.
Yeah, it was such good advice though, because so often, like you're just sitting in an audience or, in a dark room before you go on stage,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have to stand up and bring a lot of energy to the table. And it's like going from 0 to 60 in 2.4 seconds.
Yep.
And it was such a powerful reminder for me that I actually need to do something to raise my energy level before I get on stage, as opposed to once I'm on stage. So
Yep.
that was really cool to learn.
I think you should also just start demanding it, right? Just say
A
before every
trampoline?
before every speaking engagement you have, just put that on your list of things that you require before you go on.
It's tempting.
Yeah.
I will see if that's possible.
Anyway, all right. Well, thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
The Tony Robbins podcast is directed and hosted by Tony Robbins and Mary Buckheit. Annie Org is our editorial director and occasional host. The podcast is produced by Carrie Song and Tyler Culbertson. Jamie Carvajal and Adriel De La Torre are our digital editors. Special thanks to Diane Adcock for her creative review. Copyright Robbins Research International.